This is my first reflection from the Frog and Toad series. This reflection is titled, When You Lose Something. This reflection is based on Frog and Toad Are Friends, A Lost Button by Arnold Lobel. So I'm going to be summarizing this story, and when you're reading the story, Frog and Toad are enjoying a nice long walk when Toad suddenly realizes that he has lost one of the buttons on his jacket. He utters, "Oh, drat! Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." Toad is sullen and discouraged. Anytime I ever read this with my girls, we always laugh. He wants to find his lost button. So Frog and Toad begin to trace their steps. They go back to the large meadow and search through the tall grass, and they look along the dark pathways and even search in the mud along the riverside. And as they go along, different friends offer help. Together, Frog and Sparrow and Raccoon find lost buttons, but sadly, none of the lost buttons are Toad's. As you continue to read the story, first Frog finds a black button in the tall grass around the large meadow, but Toad's button is white. Toad takes the lost black button, though, and puts it in his pocket. And second, Sparrow flies down with a button having 2 holes. However, Toad's button has 4 holes. Yet Toad keeps the 2-hole button. As Frog and Toad are walking the dark pathways again, Frog finds another button. This one was small, but Toad's button is big. Yet Toad places the small button in his pocket. Fourth, Raccoon comes from behind a tree, having found a square button. Toad began to get angry and said that his button was round and not square. Still, Toad takes the square button and puts it in the pocket of his jacket. Lastly, as Frog and Toad looked in the mud along the river, Frog found another button. This time the button was thin. Toad shouts in anger, "That's not my button!" Toad's button is thick and not thin. Nevertheless, Toad puts the thin button in his pocket. And then as you continue to read the story, Toad has a fit of anger and disappointment. He begins to jump up and down, stomping the earth beneath his feet, and screams, "The whole world is covered with buttons and not one of them is mine!" Anytime my girls and I read that part of the story, we just laugh. But when you think about it, loss is actually really hard. It is often ugly and unfair. Losing something or losing someone that is very special is difficult. We experience sadness, disappointment, and also anger. Others that care try to help, but the help offered isn't always helpful. They help us search through the tall grass, and they help us look along the dark paths and through the muddy places. They search with us, they endure with us, they sit with us. They help us look for answers, and along the way, things are found, picked up, and we might keep them in our pocket, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really make it any better. When I read this with my girls, when we read it together as a family, we always laugh at Toad and Frog. Now, honestly, though, what Toad is experiencing, his anger and his response, isn't so silly. It is very real. After losing the button we love, we don't want any other, quote, buttons the world may possess or have to offer. We want our button. And when we can't find what we've lost, life isn't the same. We are not the same. Toad eventually resigns the search and goes home. And when you're reading the story, he walks back into his house, and then on the floor, he finds his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button lying on the floor. And in the story, Toad says, "Oh, what trouble I have made for Frog." We must remember our loss isn't only hard on us, but it's hard on others too. Toad found his lost button, and sometimes we find what's lost. However, sometimes we return home and do not find our lost button. There are many people who return home, and do not find their lost button. And for some, that which they have lost doesn't return or get found again. So, how do we handle loss? Well, honestly, the answer to that question isn't very easy. I know throughout the years of my experience in counseling, over 10 years, loss is actually one of the most complicated things to walk someone through. And honestly, it affects everyone differently. But I do love how, in the end of the story, Toad sits down and pulls out all of the lost buttons his friends had found and sews them all over his jacket. The black one, the one with two holes, the small one, the square one, and the thin one. All of these different buttons that they found along the way that were not his button, Toad sews them on his jacket. And then the next day, Toad gives his jacket to Frog, and Frog thought it was so beautiful. And if you ever read the story, you see Frog jumping up in the air, leaping with joy. Sometimes as we deal with a loss, along the journey we find and receive things that might end up being a gift to others. Now, of course, in the story, Toad finds his lost button and then did this thoughtful gesture for Frog. However, I still believe this thoughtful action is insightful for handling loss. Loss can cause us to retreat inward. We want to shut the world out. It feels so isolating. We feel alone. It can feel as if we have lost either a piece of ourselves or all of ourselves. But the truth is that we're still here. You are still here. Also, there are many around you who love you and care. Frog, sparrow, and raccoon. Loss makes us sad and angry, but we gotta keep living. Toad thinks of his friend Frog and gives him all that they found and gained along Toad's journey of loss. This brought Frog joy. Surprisingly, giving can heal losing. But when we experience loss, we just want to withhold, guard, and protect ourselves so that we don't lose again. And what I have found that when people live in the fear of more loss, after loss, it can continue the pain of loss. Living on, moving forward, and giving what we find along the way to gaining healing can actually heal us, especially when our gift is just ourselves to those who love us and have been enduring with us in our pain. I wonder if Toad had not found his button at home, but one day still decided to give to Frog his jacket and sewn to it all that Frog and Toad had found along the way. And to see Frog's leaping joy, would Toad have found some sense of semblance of his lost button? Maybe. But I do know this: when we live in this world, we will have loss, but we will also find. Along the way, we share loss and findings with other friends. Remember, in your loss, you are not alone. This is my first reflection titled When You Lose Something from the Frog and Toad Reflection series. I'm going to be writing and recording more coming soon, so stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.